let me get the, it gives me enough time to do this. All righty.
Wow, nice crowd. Thank you all for joining us for this Reflections program. I know that many of you are friends and know Olive Thomas, who's going to present this afternoon. It's been my rare pleasure to get to have a chance to work with her in this presentation and become friends. Got enough seats? There's a few up here. Some more. There's one or two over here. Okay. A very brief bio, because you don't want to hear me talk. But Olive is a Virginia gal. She's born in Radford and raised over at Virginia Beach. And then she migrated down to Wake Forest for education. She got her master's in business and accounting and met her husband there at Wake Forest. She continued in business administration and accounting as a teacher at Wake Forest for about 20 years, and then moved into accounting for nonprofits for another 15 years or so. She married Jack. They married, had 45 years, had 2 daughters, and she has been a resident at Brandon Oaks for about 5 years. So y'all put your hands together. Let's welcome Olive for this afternoon.
Yeah, it is my pleasure to say it will be 5 years on Sunday. So, yeah, it's been a good 5 years. It really has. And, when Buster asked me to do this, I said, what do people do for reflection? And he said, a lot of times they talk about what they did for their profession, their background, their education. So if anybody wants to hear about debits and credits, just raise your hand. Maybe you'd like to hear about them about 12 midnight so I could help put you to sleep. So my phone number is 2963 if you have difficulties getting to sleep at night. But at any rate, no, this is, I told Buster I wanted to do something because I think most people think accounting is boring, and it takes a boring person. So, but this was something that was on my mind, and Jack had thought long and hard about how he wanted to die. And this is not something that I would have thought about when I was as young as he was, but, it happened like that. So let me just give you a tiny bit of background here. Jack, and this is the last 4 months of his life. He lived with me in Pine Ridge up until September of 2020, and then he went into assisted living for about 2 months, and then he was able to come back to me in Pine Ridge with hospice, and he died toward the end of December. I learned a lot of stuff during those 4 months, and I don't know, a lot of you probably know a lot of what I'm going to present because you've been through the death of a close loved one and assisted with that. But there were lots of things that were incredible blessings, things that I don't know that I would have recognized as blessings ahead of time. So I hope this highlights not only some of the stuff that I learned, but also some of the stuff that I'm exceptionally thankful for. This is Jack's mother, And I put a picture of her right here. At this picture, I think she was about 74 years old. She had Alzheimer's at the time. She had Alzheimer's for about, oh goodness, 8 years maybe at that point. And she would have it for another 8 years. Just after this picture was taken, she went into something like the NRC. She had just had 2 hip replacements within 2 weeks of each other, same hip, broken all over again. Yeah, it was pretty awful. But you can see how far away she looks there. She was bedbound. She really couldn't speak. She couldn't focus her eyes. She couldn't talk to us. Obviously, she didn't know any of us. And that Jack, at this point, Jack was 35 or so, and the girls were maybe 4 and 6 or something like that. We would go every single Sunday out to the Blumenthal Jewish home and see her. She would not know that we were there. Jack would feed her pureed food that she could suck off of a spoon, because that was the one instinct that she still had. And Jack was a lay Eucharistic minister at our Episcopal Church in Winston-Salem. He would take her the bread and the wine every single Sunday and sort of mush it up a little bit so she could suck that off the end of a spoon too. But it was so painful. This went on for 8 years. And this is the best she looked that whole time, okay? Every time we would come back home and we'd have the children with us, I would drive because Jack would be so tearful and would be saying, I can't ever do this to you. I can't go through this and have you and the girls suffer like I'm suffering now. So at a very young age, 35 or so, he knew how difficult it was to see a person die of Alzheimer's. Plus, he was a family doctor, so he did see it from that standpoint too. Jack loved to write, and so he wrote this out, and I can't believe that I found this, but I have a copy of this written October 29th, 1988, okay? And it says, I have no desire to live a life without purpose. And then he goes on to define what for him is a purposeful life: enjoying his surroundings, helping others. That will not be a surprise to anybody in here who's known Jack for a while. His favorite thing was to take your empty plate in the grill and go put it in your trash in the trash can and your plate in the bucket there. The ability to think and reason, the ability to communicate, and the ability to love. So he was 37 years old when he wrote that. Well, time passed, and he was not diagnosed with Alzheimer's until quite a bit later. It was, let's see. Well, he started memory testing at Duke in 1996, and he was diagnosed 16 years later in 2014. He lived a long time seeing that this was coming. He saw it. I mean, it was excruciating, y'all. I mean, he knew what Alzheimer's would look like in the end, and he lived with that every day, and it was not pretty. So at that point, when he was diagnosed officially, he stopped his work. He had already gone half-time, but he stopped his work entirely, and we moved to Brandon Oaks 2 years later. Okay, so here we are in 2020. He lived a wonderful 3 years. I mean, he was so active here. He loved being with people. Somebody one time said, "What are you, the mayor of Brandon Oaks?" Because he would go around and say, "Hey, I'm Jack Thomas. I have Alzheimer's." And that was the way he introduced himself. And inevitably somebody would say, "Oh, no, you don't. Yeah, I would never have known. I really don't think you do," or whatever. But he loved that. He really did. He loved being transparent, but also he liked the praise for still dealing well with what he was dealing with. 6 months into COVID, though, it was a different story. He started getting very moody and aggressive with me over this time. He never had COVID. I'm not saying that he had COVID at all, but the isolation of COVID worked a terrible, awful thing on him and turned him into a person who had combative behavior with me. It got to the point early in September of that year that I called Ben and said, "I'm afraid we need to look into assisted living for Jack because I'm not safe living here with him." And that was not the Jack I knew. That was not the Jack all of y'all knew. He was never aggressive a day in his life, except toward the end of this whole process. And what I finally realized is that when we went to see his doctors at the Center for Healthy Aging, he had a psychiatrist there who monitored his meds, and she saw him every 3 to 6 months. And we told her what was going on with Jack, and she looked him straight in the eye and said, "Jack, are you having hallucinations?" And he said, "Yes, as a matter of fact, I am." "And delusions?" He said, "Yes, I have delusions too." Y'all, that took my breath away. I had no clue about the hallucinations, none. I knew about the delusions because he sort of, when he was being aggressive with me, he would say, "You're not working on my behalf. You don't have my best interest at heart." He had gotten this, and he never illuminated it any more than that, but it was a feeling. And a delusion is thinking something that's not true. A hallucination is seeing or hearing something that's not there. But he was experiencing this. And I tell you what, that was, from my standpoint, that was a scary place to be because Jack had always been oriented. And for you MDs, oriented times 4, remember all the histories and everything. But he was convinced that I was going to try to hurt him. And so therefore, he got aggressive with me. And it began to make sense, as strange as this sounds. I thought through it and I thought, okay, if Alzheimer's equals brain death at a cellular level, that his brain cells are dying, he doesn't get to choose which memories are the ones that he holds on to. Somehow this imposter, this delusion of thinking that I'm going to be his enemy or I'm going to hurt him has gotten in there, and he's forgotten that, I was his wife of 45 years. And so it made sense at that point. And I can't tell you that up until that point, it did make sense, but then it did. He and I didn't believe the same things anymore. We didn't share the same reality. And that's a hard one to get your head around. One of the things that I can say about this that may give you just a picture of it. If any of you watch TV, and in the last year or two, I've seen this commercial. It's a commercial for a drug called Nuplazid, which is for Parkinson's disease. Now, people with Parkinson's sometimes have hallucinations and delusions as well. And the fellow is, the star of the commercial is an artist who's somewhere between 60 and 80, I'd say, and he sees, you can tell he's looking at one dog, but he sees two dogs. Does anybody remember seeing that commercial? Okay, that is a hallucination, okay? And Jack never told me, that he saw two pipers or whatever it was he was seeing or hearing. If he was hearing voices that told him, Olive's working against you, or she's trying to hurt you, or something like that. But I don't know, somehow that commercial was helpful to bring that home and to recognize, oh, okay, there must be something that can be done about this then. And as it turns out, there was. The same psychiatrist, God bless her heart, Dr. Aziza Bankole at Center for Healthy Aging said, well, Jack, what do you think about let's taking some medicine for that and see if we can't get that cleared up for you? And so she prescribed for him something called risperidone. Oh, maybe I'm not pronouncing it right, risperidone. Okay. It's one of an atypical antipsychotic. An antipsychotic means it helps do away with delusions and hallucinations. Atypical is just because it's not like the old-fashioned antipsychotics of, 25, 30 years ago. These are newer antipsychotics that don't have nearly the side effects. And there are lots of them. Risperidone was, Jack always loved generic drugs, cheap drugs, sort of first-line things. He was family doctor through and through. So he had the risperidone. Dr. Bankole prescribed it for him. And it took a while to work. It's not a, one and done kind of thing. But he started taking that, and over about maybe 5 weeks or so, it really seemed to help. And so this is where we are at this point. Now, this is probably into September of 2020. I was walking Piper one day. That had always been Jack's job, but now it was my job. And I saw Doug Tuggle. A lot of y'all remember Doug Tuggle and his wife, Mary Ann, who lived over at the NRC, had a long journey with Alzheimer's as well. And Doug said to me, he asked, how's Jack? And I told him, and he said, well, where's Jack on the FAST scale? And I said, the what? I had no idea of what the FAST scale was, but here's your definition. It's 7 steps from no difficulty, no impairment at all, to total dependence on others. You can't even turn over in bed. You can't do anything for yourself. Okay. The first 5 steps of that FAST scale of dementia are very much like the Alzheimer's Association, where they start out with no difficulty, then mild cognitive impairment, and it goes on till you get to severe Alzheimer's or severe dementia. Okay? So now we're talking about the last 2 steps of the FAST scale, because that's what's going to be important. Jack had already gone through all 5 steps of the first, and I knew he was in severe dementia, because usually hallucinations and delusions come sometime between moderate and severe dementia. Okay? So I knew that's roughly where he was there. Remember, though, he walked into AL. When he went in on September 10th, I was not allowed to go with him. AL was shut down for COVID, and I couldn't go help him set up his room, do any of that stuff. thanks be to God, he still remembered how to use his cell phone. He could still call me. It was just a one push, and he could get in touch with me. But that's kind of where he was when he walked into AL. Okay, so here we are at FAST stage 6. So when Jack went in, he had pretty much, he had one of those. So I'd say he was like at 6.0 or 6.1 or something like that. He did have urinary incontinence due to a urological problem, but everything else he was doing for himself. He could do all of those things, dress himself, give himself a shower. This is at our apartment on September 10th. He could do all those things. Within a very, very short time, like I can't tell you how many weeks it was now. There were a lot of things going on. But I'd say within a week or two, he started telling me, hey, I'm having trouble taking a shower. I can't figure out the controls on this shower. They're different than the ones in our apartment. And either I step into a scalding hot shower or a freezing cold shower. And I don't know what to do with the shower curtain. We didn't have a shower curtain. We had a door that shut across there. So he was losing these things very quickly. It started just so fast. And please hear this, because this is one of the most important parts. It's not because of assisted living. Assisted living was doing everything humanly possible to help him. They came in and helped him figure out his closet and where to put his underwear and where to put his socks, because he couldn't figure that out. They showed him how to take a shower. They had somebody come in and stay with him and pull the curtain for him and make sure that he didn't get scalded or frozen or whatever. But these kinds of things continued to happen. Assisted living is not a one-on-one situation. He didn't have somebody like he did while he was at home with me to say, hey, do you want me to go turn on the shower for you or whatever? Then he started needing help with dressing. Again, another point that I figured out, and I researched this, and by the way, if anybody wants to see the full FAST scale, I brought about 10 copies of that. So if you want to see it, I've got it up here. And there are slightly different FAST scales for something other than dementia or Alzheimer's, okay? He needed help with dressing. He said, I can't figure out how to put my pants on anymore. And by this time, it was like the end of October. And he said, bring me some more shorts. I can figure out shorts because I can see my foot all the way through. But when I start to put on pants, I don't know what happens to my foot. So he couldn't figure out. I mean, these are just everyday things. His mood was getting better. He really was. And I wondered, of course, at first, is this a drug interaction? And I talked to Dr. Bancole. I looked up all of the warnings and side effects of risperidone. It really wasn't. None of those. Because he also started falling. He was falling in the shower. He was falling out of bed. I had to get him a bed rail to keep him in bed in AL. And keep in mind, I was hearing all this secondhand on the phone. I was then calling back the nurses and doing whatever I could, but it was a very, I don't know, I felt very helpless in that situation since I couldn't see him. So, he started eating less and less in assisted living. And I don't know about y'all, but I've had situations where I was very sick, like with a serious illness. And your hunger, your drive to eat pretty much just evaporates. And that's what he was finding. He just wasn't hungry anymore. And they'd say to him when they came to pick up his plate or whatever, "Oh, Dr. Thomas, you didn't eat both your eggs." And I'd have to call him and say, "Please don't encourage him to eat if he doesn't feel like it. He doesn't need to be scolded to clean his plate. If he feels like eating, he'll eat." This was the thing. I mean, I never thought that Jack would not eat. He was a healthy, rotund fella. Y'all remember. These steps, these fast steps, do not go in order necessarily. They will tell you that they do go in order. And if you look in the research and stuff like that, it was my experience that they did not go in order. For example, and this will surprise absolutely nobody here, that ability to speak only 6 words or 1 word, Jack Thomas, until 1 week before his death, when he went into a coma, could speak and could understand what you were saying to him, and he would just go on and on with the conversation, just like always. So he was just the same old Jack. He could still talk. He couldn't walk. It got to where he couldn't sit up. I'd have to place pillows around him to sort of prop him. He never lost that ability to smile. A lot of you saw the pictures of him and heard me say he was called in college Smiling Jack, because he always had that big grin on his face. He still, until he went into a coma, he was smiling. And it was hard for him to hold up his head about the time he was going into the coma. So here I was feeling real frustrated with how things were going. And then I had this experience. I call it my Hail Mary request. I was out, once again, walking the dog. Walking the dog was really where I got a lot of thinking done. I remember the date because it was 3 days before Jack's 69th birthday. It was November the 10th of 2020, and his birthday was 3 days away, and I was thinking, okay, I know he loves carrot cake. I'll make him a carrot cake, and I'll take it over to AL, and I can make sure that he has that there and everything. And then it was the most unusual thing. I've only had this happen a couple of times, but I had this eureka moment. I saw Ben Burks in the distance, and I thought, I know what I want to do. I saw Ben, and he probably wishes he had turned the other way and gone back into the building at that point. But this plan came to me instantly, and I thought, okay, we've got a first-floor apartment in Pine Ridge that has an exterior door that you don't have to go inside the building to get into our apartment. And our family, if they wanted to see Jack, our family is all into medicine in one way or another. And remember, that was the time before we had COVID vaccines, so nobody had a COVID vaccine at that point, but they were more than willing to be tested for COVID before they came to see Jack. I thought our 2 girls would both be more than willing to get COVID tested so they could see their dad one last time. And so it just came to me that if I could bring Jack home to Pine Ridge, that he could die at home. Because, guys, this was the end. I mean, step 7 is it. There isn't anything beyond step 7. So I knew he was dying. So, bless his heart, Ben was so sweet, and he listened to me, and he said, in his usual, very rational way, let me think about it for a little bit, and I'll get right back to you. And he did. He got back to me the next day and said, yes, he can come home. And I told him, I had again, I'd fleshed out the plans in those 5 seconds I gave him to think about it. He had appointments to see his family doc and Dr. Bancole, his psychiatrist again. I knew that I was going to get hospice in there, and I had an appointment for Good Sam to come and see him in assisted living. It would be just as easy for them to see him in Pine Ridge. And so 6 days later, everything was approved, and he came home to Pine Ridge. He didn't come in the front door. He came around the back door into our apartment. But let me tell you, that was just one of the greatest blessings of my life, to be able to have him at home. Good Sam brought in the hospital bed. They, of course, took care of all the medicines. They taught me how to administer the medicines, did all the stuff that hospice does. And then they visited several times a week. The nurse, the RN from Good Sam, visited pretty often until we got him sort of situated on exactly what the routine would be. They took him off all of his normal meds and just kept him on stuff that was going to be keeping him comfortable, so his comfort medicines. One thing I forgot to say just a little bit back was that I had, oh goodness, probably end of September, I had gotten a nurse's aide from Brandon Oaks at Home who came in to assisted living and stayed with Jack 6 hours a day. And he stopped falling quite as much. He also had PT came in, assisted living had them come in. He went from using a cane to using a walker to being in a wheelchair within a matter of like 3 weeks. He never could really master the cane and the walker. So he was really losing that ability to be upright and walk on his own. So I get Jack home, and of course I had to figure out what I was going to do with him. So I made up activities for what we were going to do. And folks, you can do a lot with somebody who is in a hospital bed to entertain them. Remember that he was more himself in the mornings. He napped after lunch and was sort of not as clear later in the evening. So a lot of these activities took place in the morning. I see Jim and Janet here, and they were some of the friends that we met with out on the patio on a warm day. We were all masked up and everything, and he loved that. I wheeled him out there in the wheelchair. I set up FaceTime calls to his friends. One of the things I did do, and if any of you have someone who is going through an end-of-life kind of thing, I put the news out on Facebook, hopefully not in a dismal way, but just I showed a picture of Jack and said, all of y'all who know and love Jack know that he's been dealing with Alzheimer's for a number of years, and it appears that he's coming to the end of his journey. He's at home with me now, and he's on hospice, and if you feel like you'd like to have a FaceTime call with him or just a telephone call with him, send me an email and I'll set it up. And that way I could control the time and the day and all of that sort of thing. Well, that was a big hit with Jack. He got to talk to so many people. And these calls maybe lasted a half hour or so. He talked to his medical partners, he talked to college friends, he talked to his nurses, special patients. I mean, anybody and everybody. He talked to the guy that had helped us at our farm forever. He and Jack had such a beautiful conversation, and it was when I say it was precious, it really was. There were some tears and lots of smiles, lots and lots of big grins. It even got Jack to the point where he would say, "Hey, Richard, remember that hike we took before the babies were born?" And this would be like before our first children were born with some of our best friends. And it just, what turned on the light behind that memory, I don't know. But seeing Richard and Debbie and talking about old times, it just brought so much back to him. The girls figured out how to do old home movies on our television, and we went through every vacation, favorite music on YouTube. Sometimes we would sing, sometimes we would just listen. I mean, it was great. There were all kinds of things that we could do. And I know so many of y'all sent us cards or letters or notes. I read every single one to him, or emails. I read them even when he was in a coma. I read them every single day to him. So he heard them. If there was a possibility for him to hear, he did hear. But one of the greatest things was this window concert by the Roanoke Symphony Wellness Group. Those of you who've been around here for a while remember that memory care, when it was downstairs below AL, they had the wellness group from the Roanoke Symphony come and play music for the folks in memory care. And Jack was a memory care volunteer. And so he knew all the people. There were like 4 or 5 musicians. And so he knew all of these folks. Julie Hickox is a blessing beyond compare, because she saw my note on Facebook about Jack getting close to the end of his journey. And she was the one that set this up. And it was priceless. I know he doesn't look like he's real excited about things right there. I videotaped the whole concert. This was like an hour's concert. We threw up the windows in his bedroom, and there was a portico right over that. And so the wellness group got together and played their concert for over an hour that day. It was the Friday after Thanksgiving, and it was wonderful. It really was. And just some of the things that I saw. Let's see. Oh, I saw Julie from the symphony also usually gets personnel in and stuff like that. But Julie is a flautist, plays the flute. And Jack never played a musical instrument, but Julie did a lot of solos in this concert. And of course, she was just fingering away like that. Jack, on top of the covers, and you can see how his hands are there, he was helping Julie just finger all of those notes. It was so cute. And then I wish I could have had a picture of this. There, underneath the covers, his toe was tapping the whole time. He was so there. He was fully present for that, and it was priceless. Let's see. Jack did, when he came home, decide to stop eating, okay? He was not eating very much in assisted living, and he had talked this over with me. He had talked it over with several medical friends, and basically did a little bit of research, or they gave him information about what happens when someone stops eating or eats almost nothing, or what happens if you don't drink. And he decided that he knew he was coming to the end of his life. He knew that his mother had been in basically a persistent vegetative state for 8 long years, when she was still sucking pureed food from a spoon. And she didn't die until the end of those 8 years, and she died of pneumonia because we decided to withhold antibiotics. Who knows how much longer she could have gone on. She was a perfectly healthy person, much like Jack, took very few medicines. And so Jack said, no, I think I'm just not interested in eating anymore. It doesn't appeal to me. And I said, okay, you're home, and whatever you want, I'll provide for you. If you say, I want a strawberry milkshake, tell me, and I'll make it for you in whatever quantity you want, from, that much to that much. And he did. He liked milkshakes, and he had, like 2 tablespoon milkshakes in the bottom of a cup a couple of times. I remember him asking for a quarter of a grilled cheese sandwich one day. But food just wasn't interesting. I had lots and lots of liquids for him to drink, but he didn't even drink a lot of liquids. He liked different tastes, so that's why he might go from Coke to orange juice to whatever. So this was a sort of waning interest there in food. Probably the most favorite thing, though, was having the girls visit with their children. So there's Sarah with baby Lucy and our other granddaughter, Adeline Burke, and Sarah's husband, David. That was just so wonderful. And, of course, we couldn't put a mask on Lucy. She was barely a year old. So the things that really helped during this time were certainly the Brandon Oaks caregivers. I mean, it was priceless to have those. I could not have done this all by myself. There is no way in the world, because I wasn't sleeping well at night. I could not, all by myself, turn him over when he was in a coma and change his bed and do all the linens and everything. That was an impossibility. I had to wait till I had another caregiver there. And Dean, bless your heart, you came over one night and helped me when I needed, there was nobody else, and I hated to ask you, but you came and helped me change the bed linens, and it was something. Nancy, and I don't see Barbara Babiak, but Nancy Pinkard and Barbara Babiak started walking Piper for me twice a day. That was just such a blessing. It was one less thing I had to do, because if I had a caregiver for 6 hours, I had to figure out how was I going to use that. I did nap during some of the time because, I wasn't necessarily sleeping at night because I didn't have night nurses. I had one night nurse one night, and then it was impossible to find more. But that was tough. The baby video monitor was really helpful. This is something that if y'all have young grandchildren, I have one now, and that's the only reason I knew about it. But there's a video monitor that you place the camera for Jack. I placed it in the room where he was, and then the monitor I could carry with me. So if I wanted to go take a nap when the caregivers weren't there, and I wanted to be able to hear him if he needed me, I could just take that with me and put it beside my bed, and he could still holler for me. So that is a lifesaver if you're ever in that situation. Well, we've sort of talked about his eating and the prescriptions, like I said, did change over to all being under Good Sam's care. At the end, when he was in a coma, Jack was having some pain. And the reason we knew that is because his face grimaced. And he had fallen at home while I was there, and we had caregivers and everything else. He was always trying to get up and walk again, even when he couldn't. And he had twisted his ankle or something. So he did get morphine, and as things went further, he got the sort of standard morphine and Haldol that hospice usually does. So, and at that point, he had gone into a coma about December 11th, and That was a tough week. It really was, especially when I didn't have enough coverage with caregivers and stuff like that. I finally moved. I didn't have enough room to put another bed in the bedroom next to Jack's hospice bed, but I had a little bench in my office that was about 6 feet long and 20 inches wide. And let me assure you, I am wider than 20 inches, okay? I know that. And it had a little foam pad on it, so I took a pillow and a blanket in there and put it next to Jack's bed, and that's where I slept for the next week. And, you know, you get an hour here and an hour there and then a little bit more, but that's why a lot of times, as soon as the caregivers would come at 8 o'clock in the morning, I'd jump up and run back to my room and get another 3 or 4 hours of sleep all at one time. But, you know, you do what you have to do. That Saturday, the 19th, the two of us were home alone, and by this point, he was taking meds every single hour. Now, I have to tell you, I was not the world's greatest caregiver because I did not wake up every single hour through the night. I kept my watch on, and I tried to, but there were times when I would go 2 hours at a time or 3 hours at a time. It didn't seem to, I certainly hope it didn't hurt him. He didn't seem to rustle anymore or be uncomfortable or anything like that. But I tried, but I just wasn't able to do it every hour on the hour. And by this time, it's all liquid medicine. So you just put a dropper full inside the cheek and just let it absorb that way. There is no swallowing or anything else. So that day, I'd gone in, given Jack his 5 o'clock meds, and I usually did it right on the hour so I could keep track of it. And I left the room for about 5 minutes and then came back in. When I had left the room, he was still breathing. And when I came back in, I couldn't tell that he was breathing. Now, people in a coma, they can breathe loudly or shallowly or whatever, and so I wasn't sure. I went to, Jack had a box in the closet, that was his closet, of medical stuff, and so I found his old stethoscope. And I didn't really even know how to listen for somebody's heartbeat, so I thought, okay, I'm going to try it on me. So I put it in my ears, and I listened, and I found out that right about here was the right place to hear a heartbeat. And so I kept it in my ears, and I bent over Jack, and nothing. So I know I needed to call the hospice nurse, so I did that, and she got there eventually. Bless her heart, it was the weekend, and she had to come all the way from the lake, and she was on call and everything. But it wasn't bad. I mean, and she took care of all the details at that point and did all the other phone calls that needed doing and everything else. And I don't know, it was a very peaceful end. It really was. I called my minister, and her name is Mary Mackin, Reverend Mary Mackin at St. John's Episcopal. And we had been talking over the course of these couple of months. And Mary said something to me that stayed with me. She said, you know, Jack had a really blessed death. I said, yeah, he did. He really did. I mean, I'd never heard that expression before, but I do feel like he had a blessed death. And thinking about that, I don't know if y'all can see any of this, but I'll read some of them. There were so many blessings. I couldn't fit them onto one slide, and I know you don't want to sit there and see 15 slides, but having friends to share my burdens. I know so many of y'all prayed for us, wrote notes, so many things. Saw me when I was walking Piper and asked how Jack was doing. That really does lift another person's burden. It really, really does. It may not seem like much to you, but it's a lot. Probably, and this is in no particular order, I just started writing things. He was able to die at home just like he wanted. I don't know anybody else that, number one, thought about their death, thought about what they wanted, and then had it turn out just exactly like he wanted. But he did. I mean, I know that sounds like magical thinking and everything, guys, but I really do think that was God's blessing on him. It was just so wonderful. Oops, I'm sorry. What did I do? Oh, here we go. Being together for that last month, oh man, when I had left him in assisted living, he was angry with me. He wanted to shake me. He did not want good things for me. And when I brought him back home, he was my regular old husband again. I can't tell you enough, if you ever get to that point, and I worried and thought about it a lot, about whether I should make him endure more psychotropic meds this close to death, but I wouldn't trade anything for it, because I got my husband back for about 4 weeks, and it was just, it was the best. So the fact that we could have the girls with us, Ben Burks, oh my gosh. As soon as Jack met him, Jack said, you know what? I think he is a servant leader. And he really is. He really is, guys. He really is. Assisted living was wonderful. I mean, the fact that we have these atypical antipsychotics now, modern medicine, the fact that he could still talk, which I know shouldn't be funny, but really, I mean, it was such a blessing. And he could say thank you for so many things. It was just fabulous. I don't know. Doug Tuggle, man, he opened my eyes to so much about what was coming and all of those things. That was just such a blessing. Hospice, Brandon Oaks at home. Oh, guys, Brenda Lear is an angel. She was our main caregiver from Brandon Oaks at home, and she is an angel on this earth. She really is. She took such good care of Jack, both in assisted living and at home. The symphony and Julie, and finally just a peaceful death. We really, really are blessed. Thanks for listening. And I'll be glad to take questions.
I don't know anything else to say, Olive, but wow. Thank you.
We are blessed.
Okay, time. Thanks, folks. See you next month.